we're going to go out to Nebraska. We're going to talk with Steve. He, him pronouns, is atheist. Wants to talk about some dark energy and stuff. Well, hey, Steve, you are on the Atheist Experience. You're talking with Justin, SR, and Armin Navabi. What is up?
Hey, happy holidays, Elliot, Armin, and Justin. Thanks for taking my call. Yeah, so I wanted to discuss recent studies suggesting dark energy is weakening over time, implying a dynamic natural law programmed by a computational universe in contrast with natural constant occurring within base reality. So are you guys familiar with the recent study titled DESI 2024?
So when you say computational, are you talking about us being in a simulation, in a quantum computing universe that we are programmed by some people, that this is not the base universe, is another base universe?
Of course,
is that what you're saying?
I'm a simulationist. So the answer, I'm a simulationist. The answer to your question is yes. So have you guys? Okay,
so you're saying the fact that there's studies that seems to suggest that dark energy is weakening, that suggests that we're in a simulation, and this is not base reality. Is that what you're suggesting?
If a natural force is dynamic and is being tweaked by a cosmic programmer, that's testable. And I'll tell you guys.
How do you know it's being tweaked?
Tweaked. The word tweak is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. You already assumed. You just somehow managed to smuggle in intelligence, intentions, awareness by the word. The studies that you're suggesting that are real, that the dark energy is weakening, shows something is changing. Something changing does not necessarily mean. See, Justin noticed the word tweak there. Why tweak? Why not? Why did you shift from changing to tweaking? Just because something is changing in our universe, it doesn't mean that somebody's tweaking it. Go ahead, Justin.
To be sure, if something is changing, all you're saying is that it's just not a fundamental constant. But the majority of the universe is not a fundamental constant. That doesn't mean that a designer is changing it.
But if a physical law is changing, that doesn't naturally occur.
Something that people assumed that was constant, now they realize it's not constant. It didn't mean, that's it. That's all that's happening. Yeah. So why do you think that means that somebody's tweaking something?
So let's assume in nature natural forces just naturally don't change on their own. The laws of physics just don't change on their own.
Why would we assume that?
Assume that, okay?
Well, I just want to make sure we're doing definitions properly. You're assuming that the law of nature that you're appealing to, the law of physics, is in fact a constant. What we're suggesting is that it's actually not a constant. Things that change over time are not constants. So it was once upon a time that it was believed to be a constant. Now we know that it's not a constant. That doesn't mean that a designer is changing it. It just means that our understanding of the dark energy is different now.
Yeah, perfectly explained. Just
so we this is a testable hypothesis. If cosmic programmer is doing this, it is testable if the mass energy information equivalency principle is correct. And how this can be tested is if they're interactive, stable, fundamental particles of mass containing bits of code simulating a particle's charge, spin, and mass. And if one bit were erased from if one bit of information were erased from an encoded particle, there'd be an equivalent amount of dissipated heat as observed when one bit erased from a computer. The particles having storage capacity, their electrons are quarks down, quarks binary-based system, info system, 3 equal probable outcomes contain 1.585 bits when adjusting for actual
Steve,
percentages.
You really suck at explaining things. You know that, Steve?
Right. But like you're destroying Occam's razor here. You're suggesting that the best explanation for this is to invent an entire idea that we don't actually exist, that we're in a simulation, rather than just saying, well, it appears that dark energy just isn't a constant. And I think this gives rise to the people who believe in the Big Bang, Big Crunch. It's not that there's a programmer changing something. It's just that our universe has constants and non-constants, and this thing happens to not be a constant. And the dark energy that's pushing everything out will eventually end in everything being drawn right back in. It's a cyclical universe. A cyclical universe, according to Occam's razor, is way more likely than inventing this entire narrative that there's a programmer out there that's put us inside of a simulation. That doesn't follow. And it also falls apart, because if we're in a simulation, then the odds that the simulation that we're in is in another simulation is incredibly high. And then you have just an infinite regress of simulations going all the way back until you just run out of infinite processing power.
Are you familiar with Nick Bostrom's argument for simulation?
No. Steve, make your own arguments instead of like name dropping. But were you trying to suggest that because you when instead of addressing what Justin was saying, you basically gave us a lot of words that didn't mean much? But were you trying to suggest, like, I wanted to see what you're getting at? Were you trying to suggest that given that the information about everything, it cannot be increased or changed if you consider everything. You're saying that if this is a closed universe with all the information, if our universe is everything and there's nothing behind it, then any missing change of all of the information that makes up this universe would lead into something extremely noticeable. And that's your proof that this is not a closed system. Is that what you're trying to say? And then you're trying to, this discovery that the energy of dark matter is changing, you're attributing that to lost information or an increased information. Is that what you're trying to get at? Is that the way that you're trying to connect the dots?
I'll tell you what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is the fundamental matter, the fundamental building block of everything is information bits. And this can be proven if we collide an electron with
I'm just going to assume you do not need to prove this, okay? So any closed system, all the information in it is constant, given that's the definition of closed, okay? Then what? Fundamental, yeah, sure. We could reduce everything to a specific definition of information. Everything could be reduced to information. You could consider the building blocks of everything to be a certain form of information. Okay, I will give you that. Where are you going to go next?
Okay, thank you for giving me this opportunity. What I'm saying is the fundamental building blocks of the universe is bits, information bits. And this can be proven.
And? No, you don't need to prove it. I gave you that already. Next. Okay,
so we can prove it.
Next, move to the next step. Don't prove it. We already assumed it. Next.
Okay, we assume we can prove this. Yes. Okay, go ahead.
No, I'm saying you don't need to go walk through proving this. Let's assume that. I want to see how you're going to get to
Steve. He's saying, okay, he's with you. He agrees. Now what?
Okay, you agree. We can test if bits of information is the fundamental building block.
Oh, fuck that.
Oh my God.
Steve. Let me ask you a question. Is the fundamental building blocks of the universe bits of information? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. Now on to the next bullet point. Now, so what? We all agree on that. So what?
Okay. So if bits, if information is the fundamental building blocks of our universe,
wait, you just did a switcheroo. Just make sure we're aware of this. We were talking about bits. Now you're calling the bits the information. How do you go from bits to information?
It's fine. Let's just
all right, go for it. Sorry.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. But yeah.
Let's just allow it because I want to see how we're going to get to the next step. That's what
I want to know where we go. I want to know where we're going.
Okay. Yeah. Bits, information, they're all the same thing. So let's go. Next step.
Information, our building block of the universe. Cool. All right.
Sure.
Awesome.
God, we're going to stay here forever. I think he didn't assume we're going to give him that, so he doesn't know where to go now.
Yeah. So what's now what? What is that?
So what now?
Where do we go?
Okay, now what? Okay, bits of information is a building block. Where did bits of information come from? Simulation.
Just,
Well,
just
okay.
You're-
See,
regular-
this is why I want to give. This is why I wanted to give him this,
Just-
because he
hang on.
assumed that we're just going to stay in proving this point,
Hang on.
and he didn't assume that we're going to go to the next step. So
Hang
now
on.
that we see the next step is nothing. Okay.
I just want to make sure. I just want to make sure, Steve. Okay. So we all agree. Bits of information, fundamental, basic building blocks of the universe. We're all there. And then when we say, all right, man, now what? The next thing you said was what? Just a reminder for me, real quick. Make sure
Must
I'm on
be a
this.
simulation.
Therefore, okay. This is my argument. Okay. All building blocks, all the fundamental building blocks in the universe is bits of information. Therefore, we're in a computer simulation.
Okay.
There, I nailed it. What do you think of that?
Do you feel like, and I mean this genuinely, okay? Because I know we were laughing for a second, Steve, but I'm not trying to shit on you or anything. Honestly, do you really believe that the statement, little bits of information are the fundamental building blocks to everything in the universe? Do you really feel that that gives any more indication to the conclusion we're in a simulation versus we're existing in the colon of a turtle that's about to fart out another universe? Do you feel like either of those, you have more weight on your side with that little bits of information thing?
There are other points I can make about simulation.
No, I
theory
totally
being
understand.
true.
And we can go to those other points in just a second, Steve. But like genuinely, I'm curious on this because let me give away my game. Okay. Let me show you my hand. My hand is this. I don't think it does, man. I don't think that statement about little bits of information being the fundamental building blocks for all of existence, I don't think that points to the universe farting turtle more so than the simulation, more so than the nothing at all. I think that piece, that statement right there is on the exact same level for every single one of these conclusions. And if that's the case, it doesn't act in favor of any one of them because they can all be used. They can all use it. Does that make sense? Are you following along with?
Why does the universe conserve computational resources?
Hey,
Why
man, we can get to that. That's a
behave that way?
phenomenally interesting topic, man. I bet you there is
False
probably some
dichotomy.
people that have talked about that. But yeah, it's a false dichotomy.
Appeal to ignorance.
And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter for what I just said. What I just said was, it seems to me that that piece of information, that piece of data that we're pointing to, we all agree, little bits of information, fundamental universe, got it, all on the same page. I don't think that points to any one particular conclusion over any other. Do you think that it does, just by itself?
Right? Information would, computational conservation would come from intelligence. Would it not?
See, you moved on to something different, Steve. Sure. And I'll give it over to Armin and Justin here, but you moved on to something different.
This is the same as the first call. This is the same as the first call. Hey, look at the DNA. It looks like a code. So it must be a coder. So now this guy, Steve is saying, hey, look, we have information. And information is the building of everything. So it must be something up there that's doing this. Like, why is your failure of thinking of other answers just means that we all have to accept your answer? This is your failure of imagining other answers. Why would the rest of us have to accept this? Just because you can't think of other answers.
It's the best explanation we have. What other explanations you have?
You're switching the burden of proof. You're claiming that this is the answer. You're saying what? We ask you why. You're like, because I can't think of anything. That's your failure. Right. We don't have to give you an answer. You are proposing a solution to us. You have to explain why your solution is the right answer.
Right. And it's not the best answer that we have. We have other good answers. We really do. It's just that they don't always hit us as nicely. The concept of a false, vacuum state, quantum scalar, inflation and shit, that just doesn't sound super pretty and sparkly the same way. Magical beings sent their son down to live for you and forgive you of your wrongness. Like, it just doesn't sound as pretty sometimes to people. And I get that, man, but we do have better answers. We do have really good understanding about the origins of our universe. It's not perfect, but the good news is that it is not relying on conclusions that are demonstrably false. And it is not getting to conclusions by utilizing any additional assumptions than anybody else's system. And that's important. We all have a couple of base assumptions. We cannot have this conversation without that. But once we agree that those are the base assumptions, continuing to add more on that are not justified makes your system weaker. And that's where this conclusion is that you're coming to us with, Steve.
I would add, by the way,
Justin, go ahead. Justin,
yeah, if you don't mind, I would add, like, even if, let's say, for example, we granted that maybe we are in a simulation. Okay, we can grant that. That doesn't mean that there's a God behind it. It could necessarily be that there's a naturalistic phenomenon. There's a super evolved naturalistic entity or series of entities that have observed their own universe and then created a simulation. So it still doesn't point to a God. Like, even if we could grant a simulation, it never is going to necessitate that there is a supernatural entity that is behind it. But if in fact we even granted that, let's just grant that we're in a simulation and that there was a supernatural entity behind it, we would still need the evidence that the supernatural entity was the cause of the simulation, because it still could be that we're inside of a simulation that was part of a perfectly natural cause that God didn't actually do.
Yeah. And can I add one more thing to what Justin said? Even if we're in a simulation, this simulation looks pretty much exactly like a world that was not in a simulation. So pragmatically, it makes no freaking difference. Like, it's identical. If this is what being in a simulation looks like, then it's identical to not being in a simulation. So why should I even give a fuck? But go on.
Laws of physics. There are ways we can tell that we're being simulated. It's a very damn good simulation we're in, and it's pretty damn close
you
to
just
base
ignored
reality.
everything that we said.
Yeah, I know. This is so frustrating. I feel, Steve, like you probably heard me sound like an asshole earlier in the show, because I know what it's like to be in one of these call queues. So I feel like you probably heard me say some not super nice things about another caller that didn't fucking listen to any goddamn thing that we said. I would really, really love it if we could, as adults, go back and forth and follow the words that the other person is saying so that we can actually have a conversation. I would love to live in a world that is for sure demonstrated to be a fucking simulation. That sounds kick-ass to me, man. But let's actually talk to each other, and then maybe we can figure out if I'm wrong or you're wrong, or maybe we're both kind of right and we're just looking at it differently. So let's try this. Hey, Armin, you just had a couple of really good points. Would you mind just saying those again for us?
No, my main point was, like, because there are other people that make arguments for simulation, and they are better than what Steve is saying. I'm not saying they're right, but they're better arguments. But to me, why should we care? This is basically what we tell deists. What we tell deists and what we tell people who believe in a simulation is the same thing. If a deist God is pretty much identical to a God that doesn't exist, then it doesn't make sense for us to even care about it, because it's so identical to a non-existent God that pragmatically a deistic God and a non-existent God are the same thing for us. So basically your simulation hypothesis is very close to a deistic God that is so resembling to world, or the world that we are in a simulation, is so resembling to a world that is just a base reality that it's a waste of time. Even, I mean, it's not a waste of time. We can have fun conversations, but pragmatically, why should we care? Like, it doesn't affect us. It doesn't affect us in any way. Like, at least the people who believe in Hinduism or in the Abrahamic gods, if their claims are true, that significantly changes the things that we're supposed to do, the things that we should be care about. The consequences to are night and day. Like, we have a heaven and a hell to look forward to or be scared of. So your theory is unimportant, isn't it?
Don't you want to know? Don't you want to know Jerusalem's character? Don't you want to know that? Do you not care?
I mean,
Really?
if we're just maybe sometimes if we're just sitting next to each other and just having I want us to be happy, and I want us to have agency. Okay, that's what matters. So yeah, maybe for curiosity. I mean, I am curious. There are many things that satisfy my sense of curiosity. This would be a small itch among all the things in the world that I'm curious about. But more importantly, there are people who are suffering. There's poverty, there's war, and solving those problems seems to be not that dependent on whether or not we're in a simulation or we're in base reality.
Yeah.
And
Steve, hang on just a second for us. We've been going for a minute. We got a couple other good calls I want to grab real quick, man. I really feel like you didn't internalize what Armin was just saying. I get where you're coming from, though, I think, about like, hey, wouldn't you just want to know? Like, aren't you just interested by that? Like, yeah, I am. And I think all three of us agree in that. Like, we would. But I think Armin's point still supersedes that, which ultimately, whether we're in a simulation or not, it doesn't matter, because this is the world that we're living in, and it seems to operate like this. Anyway, though, I do appreciate you, man. I do appreciate you having a good conversation with us.